Every prospector hopes to discover a time capsule or a piece of land that the pioneers overlooked. That desire became a reality for Freddy and Juan in the most horrifying way imaginable. They came to the doorstep of a sealed mine by following a trail of extremely pure gold. Check out those spray bars. Take a look at how clean it is. Yes, jets are concentrated precisely where they should be. Yes, that does look nice. A place that was forgotten in history books. There was more to it than a possible $3.6 million payout. It was a moment in time that had a sinister mystery about why it was closed off. Additionally, they were going to open the door wide. The 92% issue. It all began in a Colorado valley that had been forgotten. It's the kind of location that appears stunning on a postcard, but is unsettling up close. When Freddy and Juan's pickup thundered down a dirt road that was more of a suggestion than a path, the sun had just begun to rise over the rocky peaks. As it twisted through willow-tangled swampy terrain, the morning mist clung to the ground. When you think about it, it's humorous. The ghosts of the past were scattered across this area. Many people have lost everything as a result of doing this, and I most definitely don't want to be one of them. This year is crucial for its success. It's challenging because of how steep the mountain is up here. The soil has partially engulfed rusted pails, shattered planks, and the drooping remnants of an ancient soapbox. Typically, seasoned miners avoided areas like these, muttering about ill luck and uncooperative ground. However, that's precisely what attracted Freddy. They wasted no time at all. With his shovel cutting into the gravel, Juan, a man who could read a creek like a book, waded into a small bend. He spun his pan, allowing the water to wash away the lighter rock and sand with mesmerizing, skilled movements. It occurred as the murky water cleared, a tiny, bright flash that contrasts with the dark pan. Then one more, and one more. There were tiny, brilliant gold particles stuck to the lower edge. Although it wasn't much, Freddy, who was crouched next to him, noticed something amazing. Holy, oh, it's unbelievable how much gold that sucker contains. Take a look at this. You can see that the color was exceptionally vibrant even though it's only on the cart. A bright, deep yellow that exuded purity. This placer gold wasn't your typical one. Perhaps richer than anything they had discovered all season, this was something unique. However, a sense of unease persisted despite the success. Freddy could hear the villagers' whispers in his head. Tales of unusual mishaps that had been passed down through the years. In a curse that had hung over this very area for almost a century, miners just vanished. Most people thought it was just campfire chatter, but when you're by yourself out here, you start to wonder. They had a well-thought-out plan by noon. They collected soil samples from several locations: the dry gully close by, the gravel ridge above, and the creek banks. Every bag was meticulously labeled before being put onto the vehicle and driven to the local assay station. The hardest thing is always waiting. You could win a lot of money, but it's just shiny dirt until you look at the figures. The phone call came hours later. The outcomes were astounding. 92% purity on average. Take this. Natural gold nuggets normally have an average purity of 83 to 92%. They were at the very top of the spectrum. That kind of number does more than merely draw attention. It would be like shouting that you have discovered a treasure trove. In the close-knit world of gold mining, competing miners begin observing your every action in order to get the big machinery inside before anyone else could smell out their place. One needed to strike right away. Constantly the strategist, Freddy promoted patience in order to prevent spending thousands of dollars on petrol. While sifting through undeveloped territory, he wanted to chart the pay streak first. They made concessions to identify the richest zones. They would still dig test pits and bring in some of the larger machinery. The change was noticeable as soon as the excavator eventually dug into the ground. There was a thick, unaltered gravel base beneath the damp topsoil, packed closely and gleaming. Big Red, their mechanical beast, the wash plant, began to sing. Gold was appearing in about all of the cleanups. It was astounding to see the first official weigh-in. Gold worth $148,000 in a matter of days. Take a look at that. To .96, holy, that is impossible. News of a significant discovery spreads quickly, and it was going to attract more than just interested observers. The actual issue was only getting started. They were being observed. They were now dealing with a serious issue. Hawthorne's whispers. There was no threat or altercation at the first indication of problems. Only tracks were present. Freddy observed that first thing in the morning. Deep, brand new tire imprints embedded in the access road's wet dirt. For their trucks, The pattern was completely incorrect. Too clean, too wide. Someone who had visited within the last 24 hours left these. Someone who wasn't supposed to be on their property. You see, this kind of valley doesn't attract casual tourists. Most cars are devoured by the terrain before they reach a mile. The following day, when Juan noticed an unmarked pickup truck parked on the ridge above their operation, that instinct became cold certainty. For about 30 minutes, it just sat there. Before rolling away, a silent spectator stood behind tinted glass. They didn't have to scout or guess what was going on. More quickly than they had anticipated, word was getting out about their extensive cleanups. That kind of attention is just as deadly in mining country as a defective support beam. A local landowner soon told Freddy in passing that several men had been inquiring about renting the plots next to theirs. In town, one heard a similar tale. It was a traditional tactic. Make their lives tough, enclose them, and cram their claim lines. They had 5 children, lost their jobs, and were living in a camper. There are a number of dogs, I'm not even sure how many. They're all residing in a camper in the desert, you know. Freddy's answer was deliberate. He made both digital and physical backups of all their claim documentation and double-checked each one. He alerted his legal contacts. However, just after dawn on a foggy morning, the true border was crossed. Juan saw him while doing his first tour of the location. A man nonchalantly stepped directly over one of their survey stakes, while swinging a metal detector slowly and deliberately with his head down. It was obvious that he was trespassing. Juan didn't shout. His boots crunched on the icy ground as he approached the man directly. The visitor froze, and for a tense time, the detective's gentle electronic hum was the only sound. There was no space for debate in Juan's low, piercing tone. Without saying anything, the man withdrew and melted back into the undergrowth. They were no longer by themselves. The job was not slowed down by the tension. It actually encouraged them. The steel bucket teeth of the excavator scratched against something considerably harder. As it dug deeper, removing layers of old gravel, bedrock, this was the bottom of the gold trap, the valley's historic floor. Freddy himself dove into the pit because of its natural cracks and fissures. The rough and jagged rock was ideal for capturing heavy gold that had been washed down over thousands of years. Then he noticed it, a tiny glint in a shallow crevice. It wasn't only flakes or dust. It was a sturdy component. He pried it loose with care. It weighed slightly less than 2 ounces and was a nugget the size of his thumb. That's almost $4,000 at today's prices. It was the sort of discovery that alters the course of the game. How are we doing? Excellent. Got the goal. Then, oh, I'm anxious. Juan calculated that their season's total haul may surpass $3 million if the bedrock continued to produce at this rate. However, the nugget evoked a recollection for Freddy. He had heard a tale from an elderly prospector years ago about a mine known as the Hawthorne that was concealed in this valley. According to the narrative, following the disastrous collapse in the late 1800s, it was shut off. When they closed it, the old man vowed that a mountain of gold was still inside. That old rumor had always sounded like a wild yarn, but now that we were standing on bedrock rich in gold, it felt incredibly real. The narrative was going to take them to a historical door that had been sealed up. A gold core. Like wildfire, the workforce began to hear of the lost Hawthorne mine. Over the scent of diesel and lukewarm coffee, a ghost story is told. A version had been heard by everybody. A massive collapse, a workforce of miners sucked up by the earth, and a large gold vein. According to some stories, the survivors used their own hands to seal the opening, preventing scavengers from accessing their comrades' bodies. Others fled in fear as they muttered of deadly gas and unstable rock. In the end, nobody really knew, and they may have simply disregarded the tradition because the nearby bedrock produced so regularly. However, Freddy was aware that the ground was attempting to communicate with them. He had not discovered that 2-ounce nugget at random, a breadcrumb, that is. He started looking for irregularities in silence with his partner Juan, anything that didn't seem to belong in a natural environment. Thus, the ability to enter current operations, sample them, and develop them. The drawback of that is that accessing these outdated workings is costly and risky. Therefore, Freddy could definitely assist us. They only needed to glance. They discovered a rotted wall of timbers, nearly entirely covered in layers of moss and dirt. After a sweep with the metal detector near the western edge of the claims, was illuminated not by the high-pitched, sharp ping of a single nugget, but rather by the broad, low hum of a large metal mass buried deep, pushing through a thick, merciless tangle of thorny brush that tore at their clothing. Compared to the other corroded artifacts on their claim, it was much older. They brought in the ground-penetrating radar just to be safe. There was no mistaking the outcome on the screen. An eerie green picture that reveals a void underneath. A tunnel that ran horizontally before plunging sharply into the ground partially collapsed, but was still there. That evening, Freddy produced a battered copy of a mining map from the 1880s that he had previously purchased. From the town archives, the faded lines were traced by his calloused and discolored finger, till it came to rest on a tiny crosshatch. The spot was nearly identical to a shaft with the name Hawthorne on it. The hair on his arm stood up when he saw it there in black and white. It was a true legend. The two men exchanged a solemn look before making the choice. They intended to open it. The structure's actual nature became apparent the following morning, as the excavator tore away the top dirt layers. This was more than simply an old wood pile. It was a long-lasting design seal. Rusty iron bolts the size of a man's fist were used to reinforce thick oak posts. This barricade was no joke. The door was that of a tomb. There was also a carving on one of the main timbers that was hidden beneath 100 years of dirt. The wood had been deeply gouged with rough, irregular lettering. That was a chilling message. Keep the fallen souls below. The team fell silent in astonishment. This was not a true gold claim. Rather, it was the stuff of horror films. Freddy traced the letters while on his knees. The statement has been around for well over a century, as evidenced by the deterioration. A new and more intense exhilaration combined with a tangible fear. They removed a drill core from the seal's edge in order to test the ground. The rock cylinder shone in the sunlight as it emerged. Milky quartz with dazzling and possibly bright yellow, apparent gold flecks throughout. Suddenly, the eerie warning appeared more like a treasure map than a menace. I really didn't anticipate seeing that much, man. Isn't that surprising? All we can do now is hope as we'll begin rolling these up. To break through the barrier, a full day of careful rock drill work was required. The drill bit finally made contact. It wasn't fresh mountain air that hissed out. It was chilly, thick, and stale. Air that hasn't changed in many generations. A final segment collapsed, causing a rock slab to thump into the muck. A headlamp ray broke through the shadows to expose the tunnel's rough wall of color. They will soon enter a space where time had stopped. Freddy entered first. The first sound to reverberate in that area in more than a century was the crunch of his boots. The scent of rotting and wet earth permeated the air. There was more to this than a tunnel. It was a capsule of time. Where they were dropped, rusted tools were lying. Then they noticed it. Brilliant white veins of bull quartz ran through the walls, and within them were thick, ragged threads of bright gold that resembled lightning frozen in stone. Juan noticed a tiny leather pouch partly buried in the silt a few paces deeper. A miner's personal stockpile of nuggets from his last day of work was found inside. Their entire life was cut short, but touching it felt like clutching a phantom paycheck. A huge, old cave-in barred the tunnel ahead, enclosing the remainder of the mine under a mound of stone and dirt that would never be removed. Was this the catastrophe or a last-ditch effort to bury whatever was beyond? What do you believe to be the true cause of that tunnel collapse? Did those old-timers intentionally seal things away, or was it just an accident? Tell us in the comments section. To ensure that you don't miss what comes next, hit the Every Prospector Aspires to Find a Piece of Land That the Pioneers Missed, or a time capsule. For Freddy and Juan, their wish came true in the most terrible way possible. They followed a trail of incredibly pure gold to the door of a sealed mine. Take a look at those spray bars. Look at how pristine it is, indeed. Jet concentration is just where it should be. It does look good, I agree. A location that history books have forgotten. The potential $3.6 million reward wasn't the only factor involved. There was a dark mystery surrounding the reason behind its closure. They were also going to throw open the door. The 92% problem. Everything started in a forgotten Colorado valley. It's the type of place that looks beautiful on a postcard, but is eerie up close. The light had just started to peak above the rocky peaks, when Freddy and Juan's pickup roared down a dirt track that was more of a suggestion than a way. The morning mist held onto the ground as it wound through swampy, willow-tangled terrain. It's funny when you think about it. This place was littered with the ghosts of the past. Doing this has caused many people to lose everything, and I most surely don't want to be one of them. Its success depends on this year. The mountain is so steep up here that it's difficult. Rusted pails, broken boards, and the drooping remains of an old soapbox have all been largely absorbed by the dirt. Experienced miners generally stayed away from such places, mumbling about bad luck and recalcitrant ground. But that's exactly what drew Freddy in. They didn't spend any time. Juan, a man who could read a creek like a book, waded into a narrow curve, his shovel digging into the gravel. With captivating, deft movements, he turned his pan, letting the water wash away the lighter rock and sand. As the murky water cleared, it happened. In contrast to the black pan, there's a small, bright flash, then another and another. Tiny flecks of beautiful gold adhered to the lower edge. It wasn't much, but Freddy, who was crouching next to him, saw something remarkable. Oh, holy, the amount of gold in that sucker is astounding. Look at this, please. Even though it's only on the cart, you can see that the color was quite brilliant. A deep, vivid color that was pure. This was no ordinary placer gold. This was something special, possibly richer than anything they had found all season. But despite the accomplishment, there was still a feeling of disquiet. In his mind, Freddy could hear the muttering of the locals. Stories about strange accidents that had been passed down over the years. Miners simply disappeared in a curse that had loomed over this region for nearly a century. You start to wonder when you're alone out here, even if most people assumed it was just campfire conversation. By lunchtime, they had a well-planned strategy. They took soil samples from a number of places, the creek banks, the gravel ridge above, and the nearby dry valley, before being loaded onto the car and driven to the nearby assay facility. Each bag was painstakingly marked. Waiting is usually the hardest part. Until you look at the numbers, winning a lot of money is simply shiny dirt. Hours later, the phone rang. The results were spectacular. 92% purity on average. Take this. The average purity of natural gold nuggets is typically between 83 and 92%. On the extreme end of the scale, they were. A figure like that does more than just attract notice. Within the tight-knit community of gold mining, it would be like yelling that you have found a treasure trove. Rival miners start watching everything you do. One had to attack immediately to get the large apparatus inside, before anyone else could smell out their hideout. Freddy, ever the tactician, encouraged patience. He wanted to record the pay streak first to avoid spending hundreds of dollars on petrol while searching across uncharted area. They gave in. They would still dig test pits and bring in some of the larger machines to determine which zones were the richest. As soon as the digger finally sank into the dirt, the difference became apparent. Beneath the moist topsoil was a solid, undisturbed gravel substrate, well packed and shining. Their mechanical beast, the wash plant, Big Red, started singing. Gold was showing up in almost every cleanup. Seeing the first official weigh-in was amazing. $148,000 worth of gold in a few days. Think about that. To .96, holy, it's not feasible. When a big find is made, word gets out fast, and more than just curious onlookers were likely to be intrigued. The real problem was just beginning. They were being watched. Now they were facing a major problem. The murmurs of Hawthorne. At the first sign of trouble, there was no confrontation or threat. There were only tracks. That was the first thing Freddy noticed in the morning. Deep, fresh tire marks in the damp dirt of the entrance road. The pattern was just wrong for their trucks. Too wide, too clean. These were left by someone who had been there in the last 24 hours. Someone who shouldn't have been on their land. You see, casual tourists are not drawn to this type of valley. Before they reach a mile, the terrain devours the majority of cars. That suspicion became to cold certainty the next day when one spotted an unmarked pickup truck parked on the ridge above their facility. It sat there for half an hour or so. A mute onlooker stood behind tinted glass and then rolled away. They didn't need to guess or scout for what was happening. Word was spreading about their intensive cleanups faster than they had expected. In mining country, that kind of attention is as lethal as a foggy support beam. Soon after, a local landowner casually mentioned to Freddy that a number of guys had been asking to rent the plots adjacent to theirs. One heard a similar story in town. It was a conventional strategy. Cram their claim lines, confine them, and make their lives difficult. They were living in a camper, had 5 kids, and had lost their jobs. There are a lot of dogs, but I can't even count them. You know, they're all living in a tent out in the desert. Freddy gave a thoughtful response. He double-checked all of their claim paperwork and created digital and physical backups. He informed his legal associates, but the real boundary was crossed on a misty morning shortly after daybreak. During his initial tour of the site, one noticed him, a man, swinging a metal detector slowly and methodically with his head down. casually strolled right over one of their survey stakes. He was trespassing, and it was clear. Juan did not yell. He walked straight up to the man, his boots crunching on the freezing ground. The visitor froze, and the only sound for a tense moment was the soft electrical hum of the detector. Juan's tone was low and cutting, leaving no room for discussion. The man retreated and disappeared back into the brush without a word. They were not alone anymore. The anxiety did not slow down the job. In fact, it gave them encouragement. Layers of old gravel were removed as the excavator went further, and his steel bucket teeth scraped against something much tougher, bedrock. This was the historic floor of the valley, the bottom of the gold trap. Freddy plunged into the pit himself. The rough, jagged granite was perfect for catching heavy gold that had been washed down over millions of years, because of its natural fissures and crevices. Then he saw it, a tiny sparkle in a small crack. It was more than dust and flakes. It was a strong part. Carefully, he pried it loose. The nugget was the size of his thumb and weighed just about 2 ounces. At today's prices, that is about $4,000. It was the kind of finding that changes how the game is played. How are we doing? Fantastic. So you got the gold. Oh, I'm nervous. Juan estimated that if the bedrock kept producing at this rate, their season's total haul might exceed $3 million. But for Freddy, the nugget brought back memories. Years ago, an old prospector had told him about a mine called the Hawthorne that was hidden in this valley. The story is that it was switched off after a catastrophic collapse in the late 19th century. The old man insisted that there was still a mountain of gold within when they closed it. Even though the old myth had always sounded like a wild tale, it felt remarkably genuine now that we were standing on gold-rich bedrock. The story would lead them to a gold core, a historically significant door that had been shut up. The news of the lost Hawthorne mine spread like wildfire among the workers. A ghost story is told over the smell of diesel and lukewarm coffee. Everyone had heard one version: a huge gold vein, a workforce of miners absorbed by the ground, and a massive collapse. Some reports claim that the survivors sealed the hole with their own hands to keep scavengers from getting to their companions' remains. Others ran away, muttering about unstable rock and lethal gas. Ultimately, no one really knew, and the local bedrock produced so frequently that they might have just ignored the custom. But Freddy could sense that the ground was trying to speak to them. It was no accident that he had found that 2-ounce nugget. That's a breadcrumb. In silence, he and his partner Juan began searching for anomalies, something that didn't appear to be a part of nature. Thus, the capacity to sample, develop, and enter existing activities. The disadvantage of that is that it is expensive and dangerous to access these antiquated workings. Freddy, therefore, could certainly help us. All they had to do was look. After a sweep with the metal detector near the western edge of the claims, they found a rotted wall of timbers that was almost completely covered in layers of dirt and moss. Instead of the high-pitched, sharp ping of a single nugget, they heard the broad, low hum of a large metal mass buried deep, pushing through a thick, merciless tangle of thorny brush that tore at their clothing. It was far older than the other corroded artifacts on their claim. To be safe, they brought in ground-penetrating radar. The result on the screen was unmistakable. A spooky green image that shows a hole beneath it. Partially collapsed, but still present was a tunnel that went horizontally, before descending rapidly into the earth. Later that night, Freddy pulled out a ragged copy of an 1880s mining map he had previously bought from the town. Archives. His finger, discolored and calloused, traced the faded lines until it rested on a small crosshatch. The location was almost the same as a shaft bearing the name Hawthorne. He saw it there in black and white, and the hair on his arm rose up. It truly was a legend. Before making their decision, the two men exchanged a serious glance. They were going to open it. The next morning, when the excavator ripped away the top layers of dirt, the true nature of the structure became clear. This was not just an old pile of wood. The seal's design was long-lasting. Thick wood posts were reinforced with fist-sized rusty iron bolts. There was no humor about this barricade. It had a tomb-style door. Additionally, one of the main beams had a carving that was obscured by a century's worth of dirt. Rough, uneven letters had been deeply gouged into the wood. The message was chilling. The fallen souls should remain below. The group went hushed in shock. This was the stuff of horror tales, not a real gold claim. Freddy knelt down and traced the letters. The degradation shows that the statement has been in place for much over a century. There was a definite worry mixed with a fresh and more intense excitement. To test the ground, they took a drill core from the edge of the seal. As it came out, the rock cylinder gleamed in the sunlight. Milky quartz with sparkles of apparent gold and a brilliant, unnaturally bright yellow. The ominous warning suddenly seemed less like a threat and more like a treasure map. Man, I truly didn't expect to see that much. Isn't that unexpected? As we start rolling these up, our only option is to hope. It took a whole day of meticulous rock drill labor to break through the barrier. At last, the drill bit touched down. The hissing was not the fresh air of the mountains. The air, which hasn't altered in many generations, was stale, cold, and heavy. A granite slab thumped into the muck after the last section crumbled. The rough wall of color of the tunnel was revealed by a headlamp ray that pierced the darkness. Before long, they will reach a place where time has stopped. Freddy was the first to enter. The crunch of his boots was the first sound to echo through that region in over a century. The air was heavy with the smell of moist, decomposing earth. This wasn't just a tunnel, though. It was a time capsule. There were rusted tools where they had been dropped. Then they were aware of it. Bull quartz veins flowed through the walls, brilliant white, and in them were jagged, thick threads of brilliant gold, like lightning set in stone. A few steps deeper, one saw a small leather satchel partially submerged in the muck. Inside was a miner's personal cache of nuggets from his last day of work. Touching it seemed like holding a phantom paycheck, even if their entire existence was cut short. The tunnel ahead was blocked by a massive, ancient cave-in, which buried the rest of the mine behind an unremovable pile of rock and soil. Was this a last-ditch attempt to bury whatever was beyond, or was this the disaster? What do you think caused that tunnel to collapse in the first place? Was it a mistake, or did those old-timers purposefully shut things away? Tell us in the space provided for comments. To make sure you don't miss the following step, press the